Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Safety Brief. Today's topic is one that hits home for a lot of our partners and even non partners, and that's how to have better cybersecurity conversations with your clients. Cybersecurity is complicated, but your clients don't need to feel overwhelmed by having conversations about it, right? So, what they do need is clarity, confidence, and a clear understanding of how security impacts their business. So, today we're going to be talking about how to simplify the conversation and make prevention for security resonate with the decision makers. We have Mike and Matt here today joining us. Thank you both for being here as always.
Yeah, you bet.
So, to start us off, many small businesses think cybercriminals only go after the big guys, right? The truth is, SMBs are often the easiest targets because they lack the resource and they assume that they won't be noticed. So, with that, why do so many SMBs believe that they're too small to be targeted? And how can partners overcome this mindset when they're having those conversations with the decision makers?
Well, they think they're not going to be targeted because they're disillusioned, if you want honesty. Back in the day, there used to be the assumption that computers that were of home users were not viable targets. Nobody wanted to risk, you know, any kind of charges for somebody's tax return because what are you going to get from that? Some personal information, but if they weren't affluent enough, all you've done is stolen information from somebody that may get you a credit card that gets you a $2,000 limit. Nowadays, everybody's working from home. Any device that's on that network can be used to find other information that could also be highly valuable. So it's a very target rich environment. You also have, games that people play that have active scripting on the back end. People use Discord all the time. Discord does not have a file scanner built into it. You can send a link, you can send a file, anything that you want through Discord, and a person can get hit with it. So anybody that's using any of these, lovely new things in their environments, and trust me, we've seen it all. We've seen everything show up on what should be considered work computers, and you ask yourself, why is some of this stuff on there? It's because it's dual purpose at this point. A person's work computer is also their personal computer. There's commingling of data. You have tons of office stuff, you have tons of personal stuff. All you need is that foothold, and you can start working on getting access to other devices. If they have a VPN, if they're running the VPN and using it for personal entertainment, well, now you have the access. You get onto their personal device via, say, a Discord link that gets sent to them, sets up a reverse shell. Now they're on a VPN. You have the capability of accessing all of those documents that are supposed to be gated off.
Yeah. What's interesting about this topic, and it's a good question to pose, is threat actors are not always incentivized by the number or the dollar amount that they can obtain, but also the difficulty level of what their target is to compromise. Let me give you an example. So Elizabeth led it off with a great point. Matt absolutely pointed out some important aspects of this topic, but there's two big key attributes around SMBs that makes them a ripe target for threat actors. And one is market share. Small to medium sized business makes up a large population, specifically in the United States, of course, the context we're speaking out of, makes up a large population, right? So if you can reduce your average payout per target, but you can increase your number of targets and payouts, there's an economy of scale there, right? When you talk about difficulty, when you talk about likelihood of paying out if it's less than $2,000 or less than $8,000, and this isn't to subjugate or undermine the average ransomware payout is going up, right? And that's been a trend year over year for many years, but it's a crab trap mindset, right? It's like some traps are gonna have stuff in them, some won't. But I'm gonna put 100 of these things into the water, and I'm gonna see what it comes up with, right? And these are phishing
Yeah.
kits, these are social engineering attacks, these are whatever it may be that users might just walk across or find an ad on Instagram or find an ad on Facebook or Google that isn't exactly super validated, right? Yes, advertisers do some form of back checks, but their payout is people buying ad space, right? And that's their business.
Oh, Mike, you hit your
We
mic
can't
there.
trust it
Yeah,
just
you
because.
muted.
Yeah, you're good. We can't trust it just because it's an ad that it's legitimate, right? And users, again, unsuspectingly will go to these Timu like links and just click willy nilly. But so market share is the first point. The second is the one you pointed out, which is low difficulty to compromise. So if we look at, hey, they're abundant and everywhere, these specific SMB like targets, and they're easy to compromise, then there's a business model there for threat actors, right? There's a high amount of supply and there's low difficulty to compromise. And that's often where we see that vicious complement of both of those factors meeting in the middle. And that's what threat actors are incentivized as. Third point, which is also relevant. The authorities, mainly cybercrime divisions, FBI, whatever, are far less more likely to be pulled into cybercrime less than $10,000 of damages or anything not targeting core infrastructure or government entity. So if you're thinking about, hey, I don't want to alert the authorities in this Grand Theft Auto like world that we live in cybercrime, right? I don't want to spark a bunch of activity. I don't really want to cause a big fuss. I just want to get a decent amount of payouts today so I can show up back to work next week and get more payouts. Right? So that's why the shift is kind of focused from this assassination, high profile, high impact type attack vector. And it's I could terrorize the common man far easier and far less disruptively to my operations. And I'm really not going to attract a lot of attention, right? FBI is not going to come after me for taking out a 2 to 3 person food truck business, right? But you know what? For that 2 to 3 person company, that's their livelihood, right? And so it's painful to them, and that's why they pay out. And they're often small. I wouldn't say too small, but they're small enough that maybe they don't warrant needing cyber insurance. They don't budget that out in their business model. And so again, you know, are they targeted? Yes, most definitely. SMBs are some of the most targeted for the reasons we've mentioned, but it's again, it's not this high profile assassination type media driven, movie driven model that we often think of some guy swooping into a data center, highly encrypted, bypassing lasers, right? Like this is what media's given us, but it's often somebody loses their wallet at the bank and that or their gas station and now it's credit card fraud, right? Because what are they going to do? They don't have legal counsel. They could they're billed paycheck to paycheck making their bills meet, right? They're just going to pay out or do whatever they need to get their money back. And so again, it's a very dark side of what we work in and see every day. But the message here, always leading with education, is if you are a small to medium business, under 10 employees, under 5 employees, do not, and we say this again from an education standpoint, do not think of yourself as exempt, right? Because you're not. You're really not. And that's the unfortunate reality, but it is a point worth mentioning.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. And I think another thing is even as a single person, right? Not even talking about SMBs or being a small business. Even an individual, like you stated, is, vulnerable to attacks, right? So for a small business to think that they're too small when an individual person is not is just crazy. Um, and it's not always about ransomware or anything like that. It could also be for, botnet to control and to build their army so they can do those larger attacks even easier. I also think just helping clients understand that every business has valuable data and every business is a potential target can reframe that conversation a little bit. Now, to
Most
change
definitely.
up, yeah. Now, to change up this conversation even further, stats are also powerful when they're relatable, right? So, what are some of the most effective statistics or real world stories to share with SMB leaders to kind of thwart that conversation with them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one, and again, Some people I think statistics are helpful as a communication tool, but I get that there's a lot of, not discounting of statistics, but people can see them as somewhat baked. And so I get it. But the important point of a pattern that we've seen, that there are, of course, statistics around, and is mainly the focal point of ease of compromise as being email and SaaS right now. And we talked about this, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, about how we migrated a lot of these functions off of on-premise, bare metal hardware we can secure effectively because we could touch it, see it, and troubleshoot it and repair it. It's right in front of us. And we've ported it all up to this metaphorical cloud, somebody else's computer, right, by some major enterprise. And so once you find a way to compromise that metaphorical rental facility, right, where there's tons of cells and tons of ways in, you start noticing patterns. Be like, hey, this U-Haul facility is about 20,000 storage units, and 1 in 20 lockers don't have a lock on them. So guess what? I've now found a uniform pattern I can use to forecast out my work as a threat actor for the next 90, 120, 360 days. And so it's difficult to somewhat conceptualize as a business owner, but the more uniform to the industry standard you make your business, the more uniform you set your target metaphorical archery target to, right? Like, it's a similar target. A lot of people have compromised it. Now there's known ways of compromising certain things in Google Workspace, Office 365, OneDrive, SharePoint, the works, right? And so, and again, it's not demonizing any of these cloud vendors, but again, it's if we have monopolized how we all access files in the name of uniformity and standardization, we gotta also acknowledge the risk that is, all right, we are just like everybody else, and we do use file share just like everybody else, and we are prone to the same vulnerabilities and misconfigurations that everybody else is. And so I think statistically, looking at email, social engineering, combated by inline prevention, scanning emails before they're delivered, being able to pick up on behavioral analytics more than good or bad email is a really important piece right now. And not that secure remote access or endpoint is not, but that's where the threat actors are fishing, and that's where the fish are.
Yeah, I think another one of the biggest challenges is avoiding the cyber speak, right? Cyber jargon.
Right.
So our next question is, how can partners translate technical cybersecurity jargon into simple, relatable business language? And I can start this off by, when being in marketing and sorry, I think someone's echoing here. Sorry about that. So, being in marketing and having to do this with a lot of end user content, my advice is, instead of explaining endpoint detection or SIEMs, translate those conversations to business value. For example, instead of saying next gen firewall, say it's like having a smart security guard at your digital front door. The goal is to connect the solution to outcomes that they care about and that they can understand, right? So, protecting data, maintaining customer trust, and avoiding downtime. This is why you've probably heard over 100 analogies from us over the time in the safety brief, and other tech jargon advice before we any other tech jargon advice before we move on. Sorry, I'm echoing here. I'm gonna mute.
No, you're okay. Um, again, I think we understand what seatbelts benefit us to automobile operators, right? People that drive cars. We understand that there's risk if we don't, and that there's risk mitigated if we do. And that's really all cybersecurity controls are, is they are risk mitigation controls. And there's a variety of them, right? There's compensating controls, there's administrative controls, technical controls. But, if I know that I have to go on a long road trip, and the risk is the more miles you drive, the more prone you are maybe to having an accident, or whatever the distance of the trip is. You could drive at different types of the day, right? So my compensating control would be, I know I'm going to be driving at night. Driving at night comes with more risk. Before I go on this cross country trip, I'm going to go drop $120 and get some brighter headlights, right? Like, I'm going to do something in the way of risk mitigation that will help me compensate for the risk I'm absorbing by driving at night. And so again, like cybersecurity is really no different. There are risks. There are risks you can mitigate. There are risks you have to accept. And then there's risks you can compensate for, primarily those that you have to accept, right? Like I know that if I'm going to get there within a week, I got to drive to California. I got to drive at night at some point, right? Like it's undoubtedly I have to do it. And so, it's things like if you have to open certain remote access rules, limit it to a certain security group. If you're doing that, limit that security group to two-factor authentication, right? And again, it's all taking a really good inventory of what exactly are the risks that I'm encountering at this company or in this application. And then it's again the due diligence of sitting down, inventorying those things, thinking through these things. It's not rocket science. It's not sexy. It's really just discipline and work of going through and inventorying all these risks and then figuring out how do I mitigate these things? How do I compensate for some of these things? Or how do I eliminate some of these risks? Right. And there are some that can, certainly. And so, analogies aside, all cybersecurity is risk mitigation, specific to obviously compromise or the risk of a data breach that would inhibit a business's ability to function and thus pay its employees. And so it's important risk mitigation, but it's no different than when you wake up, if it's raining out, you're going to walk a little slower so you don't slip. If you're working at a restaurant, you're going to wear non-slip shoes, right? If you're working in a manufacturing plant or a factory, you're going to wear boots with steel toes, right? Because what's the risk? The risk is there's a lot of heavy stuff and it's falling. What do I do? Can I stop the things from falling? No. What do I got to do to protect my feet? I got to wear compensating control in the form of steel toe boots. And so, yeah, I think ultimately we see these examples every day. And, I would say ultimately it comes down to being honest and transparent about the risks that your business is facing and finding ways to inventory them, control them, mitigate them, and then compensate where you can't control them.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the steel toe boots. I've never thought of prevention in that sense, and how often prevention is actually adopted by people. Maybe not in cybersecurity, unfortunately, or in health. But it is funny, the hard hats, the steel-toed boots, the non-slip shoes. That really paints a new picture in my brain. I haven't thought about that one myself. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
totally. And it's interesting
Now,
how, not to cut you off, but just a real quick point. It's interesting how those weren't standards, including the seatbelt,
yeah.
until there was severe damage dealt by the absence of them, right? And so I
Mhm.
think in cybersecurity, we're in such an innovative space that a lot of this maybe isn't as industry regulated as it should. But then you look at places that are under various compliances, GDPR, PCI DSS, HIPAA, CMMC. Now those industries are saying, hey, you know what? If you're going to work here, you're going to wear a hard hat because of
Yeah.
the risks inhibited by working here, right? And if you're going to drive, you're going to wear a seatbelt. If not, you're going to get pulled over and get a ticket. And so some of these, again, by the nature of our business, industries are catching up and they're regulating these risks and mandating, hey, you know what? Like, we're all on the same page that every car should have a seatbelt. You may not like to wear it, but tough. You got to protect yourself and you got to protect other people on the road, which could be harmed as well. So, anyway, I just wanted to point out that the industry is leading the way with some regulation to help with some of these standards, but OSHA is far older than most cybersecurity frameworks.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Now, I'm super excited for this next question because if you are a Blockworks partner and you have been in the partner portal this week or even attended this week's PSA, you would know we just dropped some new rebrandable content for partners. So, with that, how can rebrandable content such as infographics, one pagers, and even just social media posts help partners communicate cybersecurity value more effectively?
Yeah, I mean, as far as communicating the value, I think the dilemma that, you know, guys like Matt and I have that are more technical is that we're good at speaking to technical teams and demonstrating the value, but then that team has a whole nother dedicated team of how do I communicate this value to business owners. I'm not saying that Matt can't do it or I can't do it, right? Matt's better than I in a lot of ways in that way, but specifically knowing your audience and being able to demonstrate, right, this is what they find valuable and this is what they would be they would have their confidence bolstered by, right? And so for some technical teams, that's a lot of due diligence. That's a lot of stack v stack, like the everyday work that Matt does in the threat intelligence sphere and seeing, hey, we're going to Mythbusters our way to the best solution, and we're going to keep testing and testing until we know that we're running the best in breed, which we are. And so, for the end user, at the end of the day, they might not necessarily care so much about what tool, what platform, or whatever, but they want to know that the business is intact, that their job is going to be there next week, that their payroll and their Christmas bonus or whatever it is that they have planned with their families during the new year and everything else is going to be predictable. And there's a high level of certainty there. So there's an intrinsic human need within security that is safety, right? Like I know that I'll be able to provide for my family. I know that I'll be able to pay my bills. And that's the business we're in, whether we'd like to admit it or not. And there's a lot of maybe disgruntled or frustrated people when cyber attacks come into fruition and there's an incident, but the root of it is the human condition of what I thought was safe and what I thought was certain and what I thought was secure is not. And so trying to educate on that without coming off as this fire and brimstone doom and gloom is always the dilemma, right? You want to be a truth sayer, most definitely, but you also want to make sure that we're not, how do you say, inducing fear for that to be the buying posture or the buying emotion, right? If we don't want people to invest in cybersecurity because they're afraid, they want to do it because it builds confidence and that reduces risk and they sleep better at night, right? And so, yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. And speaking of the stack versus stack, for our partners, Matt, what advice would you give to them on how to utilize that document to have those one-on-one client conversations?
First thing I would suggest is you need somebody that knows how to actually translate and put it into a language that people understand. Secondly, it is highly recommended that when you have those conversations, it is explained the differences between what is actually being shown there. We are using the most advanced technology versus, let's just say, the NCR payment plan or payment systems that Walmart uses, or what we're comparing against. They're not smart, they're not intelligent, they fail abysmally at everything. In fact, we now know based on some information that certain things are not designed to work unless you have an AV solution in place, which is kind of hilarious to hear. But you basically just have to be able to put this into a language that people are going to understand. The data speaks for itself, but you need to paint a picture. And that's where, if you don't have that capability of painting the picture, then find somebody that can, because the data alone is going to overwhelm people. And if they are not deeply technical, they are going to be very lost.
I thank you for that, Matt. Another thing is those visual tools simplify those complex ideas, infographics, and one pagers cut through the noise and give clients something that they can grasp at a glance. It's a lot easier to look at an infographic than it is to read an entire PDF or an entire Word document, right? So, to close this off for today, how can partners confidently position a prevention first approach without making it sound overly complex or even expensive? Because, as we've stated previously in other episodes, when we say the word prevention, a lot of thoughts run through the end client's mind of like the prove it mentalities or I've never heard of that, or how does that make sense? Kind of thoughts, in a sense.
Yeah, there's a couple of different spheres in our everyday lives that benefit from proactive maintenance, So our health is one, our cars are another, and our homes or our apartments or townhomes or dwellings are another. And so if we're able to stay in front of keeping my AC up to snuff, leaving spring going into summer, less likely I'm going to have a very painful outage of no AC in the summer. If I stay on top of my proactive car maintenance and I'm taking it into the service center and right, vice versa, you guys get it. If I
I'm going
take
to use
vitamin
your car
C,
maintenance. I'm going to use that car maintenance one and break that down
yeah,
a little bit more. Okay.
yeah,
Everybody knows about a certain car model called the Corvette, right?
yeah,
Okay. Does everybody know about the complications that existed within the Z06? And this is where preventative maintenance comes in.
I've definitely heard of them, but I can't pinpoint exactly.
So the
what.
Z06
I know the
came with a
Z06
7-liter naturally aspirated V8 engine. It was insane. It had a lot of power, looked good, was a ticking time bomb. So in order to make that engine, they had to get a little bit creative. So they had some terrible valve guides that were put into the heads on the Z06 engine. They failed. You would drop a valve, you drop the valve, you get metal shavings that start going through the engine, through your oil. You end up having to get an entirely new block. Those blocks at the time when they were new were 20 grand, give or take. So now that the cars are used, people are starting to buy them. People that couldn't afford them when they were new and couldn't afford the maintenance of them when they were new.
Sure.
So the first thing they're having to do is preventative maintenance. Now, that means they're buying the car, they're taking it to a shop, and they're having to disassemble the engine. They're having to rework the heads and redo the valves and the valve guides so that it doesn't drop a valve and kill the engine after they've had it. Now, that's not a guarantee. So this is one of those things where we talk about prevention is not a guarantee. I know people that have spent 6-10 grand reworking the heads, redoing everything on this, getting it back together, driving it, still blows up. Because even with all of that work being done, there was a chance of failure. It's the same thing you're going to run into with the prevention first solution. Less of a chance, substantially less of a chance. Okay. It's greater than 99% that a prevention first or preemptive solution is going to handle the threat that is coming at you. But there is always that possibility that you are going to have the LS7 issue that pops up in your environment and it's going to grenade your engine. Very, very small chance. I would rather pay to have a solution in place that has fully reworked heads to make sure that they are perfect when put back on that engine block, which is my environment, to prevent that one little piece from sneaking through and getting those metal shavings in my oil, which then end up causing the engine to go kaboom. Now, mind you, you're not going to see an actual explosion. That would be far cooler. But what you're going to see in the issue that happened above is you're going to get a low oil pressure warning because you have metal shavings that have basically wreaked havoc on the innards of your block. And then once you get that low oil pressure warning, that's when you're going to start hearing funny noises and you're going to hear a rough idle, and your environment is not going to be operating as you would expect it to be. Now, the problem is some people have been hearing that really weird noise for a while in their environment, and they're still driving on it like it's a 1990s Nissan Altima. And they're just hoping that they can get through that day without having to do anything. The problem is you keep driving on something like that, you keep running an environment that is making a funny noise and that something is visibly wrong with, and you can see, you're going to have a catastrophic failure that's going to come down the road. That preventative maintenance is going to save you from having to pay a whole lot of money down the road. Now, if you happen to own an Infinity, I'm sorry, but no amount of preventative maintenance is going to fix you. If you'd like to know why, I will gladly tell you, and it involves them using a plastic drain plug, or I'm sorry, a metal drain plug in a plastic oil pan. Yeah, that's a genius right there. There's no preventative maintenance that will fix that. You're screwed when you go to get your oil changed. Oh yeah,
configuration.
Yeah, and it's about $1,000 in order to recover from that, and
That's painful.
it's intentionally designed that way so that you will continue to have to do that at least once a year. There's ways to fix that. I fixed it.
I love the analogy.
It's probably the closest analogy we can have, because it shows that one small little object can become a nightmare. I mean, we
Yeah.
could have gone with the Ford Pinto thing. Just don't get rear-ended and you won't get blown up.
No, I think it really shows how powerful, the analogies are, because imagine trying to explain that in all tech jargon, right? It would be almost uncomprehensible even for me. So no, I think that was a great example there, Matt. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for today. But just remember, cybersecurity doesn't have to sound intimidating. By simplifying your language, using clear stats and stories, and leveraging tools like the rebrandable content and effective reporting, you can build trust and show clients that proactive security isn't just possible, but it's practical and essential and can even be profitable. Well, that's all for this week's safety brief. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, we do have an upcoming webinar to break down our cloud and SaaS service operation Shield Wall, September 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, stay secure and we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.